Sabrina 2000s comic, issue 36. The story starts with Harvey telling Sabrina that they're getting a new principal. Let me guess, he's gonna be a bad guy and piss me off. Greendale Middle School? Didn't it clearly say that Sabrina was going to high school early on? And she has 14 birthday candles. At least this fits her short design. The top of the page on the site with the comic says Sabrina the Teenage Witch. It was open-minded of Harvey to say he or she about the new principal. Then logic goes completely out the window as the story has the audacity to be ridiculously outlandish in the most insane extreme possible with how the new principal would be. He's a drill sergeant nasty. This better be explained by a plot twist where it turns out he's not the real new principal. After all, wouldn't he end up fired? That's probably why he won't be in any later stories, right? This isn't a good joke, it's horribly mean-spirited. And I can only imagine they did it for a joke. The guy impatiently yells at them to run into the auditorium, and acts oversensitive, asking what Sabrina's remark was. I'm glad Sabrina was brave enough to tell him, there's no need to yell, you know. I don't want to believe that a guy like him would ever get hired to be a principal. He's even still dressed like a drill sergeant. Isn't it illegal to wear a soldier's uniform or whatever if you aren't currently in that actual job? There's no reason Sabrina wouldn't just use magic to brainwash him out of this and make him a regular principal. That would be doing good for everyone in the school, so there's no excuse. He threatens to give them detention until they graduate college. Wouldn't that be against the rules? They didn't really do anything to deserve that. I want to believe this would never happen. But I've heard so many bad things about public schools in America and their teachers. Of course, a part of why teachers tend to be portrayed as sadists is also that it's an easy way to generate conflict, and nice teachers are boring. But this is only interesting in the sense that I'm watching a train wreck. Chloe even says that she didn't get sent to military school. Why didn't this guy go to work at a military school? Like Spangler or whatever from Malcolm in the Middle. I didn't mind him as much. This kind of thing seems like it would only be explainable by witchcraft because it's so forced. The lack of in-universe logic makes it tempting to wonder if there's a meta-logic reason behind a bad story idea because you want to think of some explanation. Did the writer have bad principles himself? My principles were fine. Oh, this guy's called the corporal. He's still the stereotypical drill sergeant, so what's the point of calling him a corporal? And he'll be assigning work details. Why didn't he wait to open up the school if there weren't going to be any classes? Oh, because he wants to force the students to be slave labor? He's not even at a high school. He's a middle school principal, all of a sudden. Sabrina once again has the courage to talk to him, asking where all the teachers are and questioning no classes. Won't the school board find out that he's running the school differently and get really mad at him and fire him? Because schools have been run the same way for decades and aren't allowed to change things. Surprisingly, he doesn't yell at Sabrina for questioning and interrupting him when he was oversensitive last time. I almost called him a her. He says that the teachers reported at sunrise and are busy cleaning up their own section of the school. They're complaining that this is nuts and not what they signed on for. At least now they know how the janitor feels. But this is going to lead to high turnover rates and only the most desperate people agreeing to replace him as teachers. Now, from the start, I could understand why I'd want a building to be clean. But the fact remains that destroying the morale of his employees won't go without punishment, and he should realize that. A good story would have him end up getting fired because he's not allowed to do this stuff. Why isn't Jem using her witch girl lawyer powers to magically get him fired? Instead, after satisfyingly telling this idiot, this is a school, not a boot camp, Sabrina stupidly gets her and Chloe in trouble, telling him that the students won't be doing any housekeeping, even though he's in charge. And predictably, the students don't stand with her because they're cowards and don't want to get punished. Wouldn't this corporal be a teacher's strike waiting to happen? They also have unions that make them impossible to fire. So they don't have to do anything, he says then. After Sabrina and Chloe do some cleaning, the guy says not bad. And Chloe and Sabrina are idiots here by whining that they want some credit for working hard, when obviously not bad is a compliment. It's the negative serious person's way of saying great job. So he gets oversensitive again and appoints them to clean out the storage room. And yet he admitted that they did swell when he didn't have to. Sabrina has every reason to use a cleanup spell to clean the whole room. Chloe shouldn't be whining without clearly saying why. That if anyone finds out that they finished way too early to be believable, it'd either make it obvious that something supernatural is going on, or the corporal would think they're cleaning gods and assign them to clean places a lot more often. Maybe he'd think they were getting outside help and punish them for thinking independently. Chloe complains that Sabrina's aunts won't approve of Sabrina using her magic at school. Even in a situation like this, if they really loved her, they'd side with her, considering what kind of principal they have. I hope her only objection is that Sabrina might be found out. She's never erased memories in this comic, but I know she can teleport, so she should be able to summon Salem and get him to do it. Chloe sees Jem and says that for once she's glad to see her, and hopes that she's hatching a scheme to deal with Bandsaw. Sabrina's happy too. So I'm guessing that this will be a cruel, sadistic hope spot, and Jem will actually be siding with Bandsaw, when she has every reason to want him removed. Because there'd be no reason that he'd treat her any better than everyone else if he's that evil. I guess she's so psychopathically selfish that even though she has no reason to find him likable, she used the richness to get a special deal where she'd never get bullied by him. And she's just gonna lure Sabrina into a trap. Maybe they shouldn't have the whole plot twist that she's useless given away by Sabrina being hopeful, because the comic in general is really predictable. Jem says that Sabrina and Chloe are the last to be measured for their uniforms, which are provided by Little Gem Enterprises, a subsidiary of the Stone Corporation. Wouldn't Jem have to have a uniform too? Her parents don't even like her. Jem is just so obsessed with seeing Sabrina in particular suffer that she wants to stay at the school. It would have been good to see her suffer just like every other student. The corporal singling her out for favoritism seems completely out of character. He doesn't have a soft side. On the bright side, it's not like the uniforms look bad. They're red, so they stand out. But wouldn't the corporal need the permission of the school board to suddenly decide that the school needs school uniforms? At least he and Jem's corporation were merciful enough to provide the students with the uniforms for free, I assume, because we aren't told otherwise. In Catholic high school, their parents are forced to pay for the uniforms. The corporal asks what's with all the chatter because he's whiny like that. I don't blame Sabrina for calling him Colonel by accident because it's a way more memorable title. She says that she's a reporter for the Greendale Beacon and they'd like to do a feature article on him. She asks him to open the office so she can get her notepad. And there's a clank. The feature article would obviously insult him. So the too good to be true thing is shut down because he shuts down the paper while the school is under martial law. Then he calls her a troublemaker, though she was planning against them, and gives her 2 weeks detention. I didn't need all this to hate him. I hated him from the second he showed up. So a lot of the story is just painful tedium. Even if it is interesting to see how a drill sergeant would run a school, we don't hate the students enough to enjoy it. You'd think a principal would need actually just cause to give someone detention, and not be able to just shut down the school paper. Salem laughs at Sabrina's uniform for some reason. I hate sociopath Salem. This uniform isn't funny. I'll be absolutely pissed if the ants don't take Sabrina's side and tell her to calm down. Because so far, the story is horribly frustrating, so how can I possibly call it good? I feel like Sabrina mentioning the name of the principal in the way she does is really stilted. She should have told them, "My school's a new principal," and say his name, and that'd be the first thing to come out of her mouth when she'd get home. Oh god, these are the bad versions of Hilda and Zelda. What's wrong with this comic? Instead of Hilda wanting to complain about the corporal and say that she's a witch she used to know, which is actually something that I was expecting when reading the script out loud. I thought her aunts would get him fired because they knew him and knew he wasn't the real principal. Instead, Hilda completely misses the point and actually bitches about Sabrina using the cleanup spell, even though she's clearly justified because of extreme circumstances. How in the world does Zelda think she's making lame excuses? I bet she would have used the cleanup spell. How in the hell is that not an emergency? What the hell would constitute an emergency for a cleanup spell? Who's gonna die if you don't use a cleanup spell? The story turns into absolute trash because Zelda thinks that's not enough this time. Even though if the corporal discovered Sabrina was a witch, she'd have had the excuse to get rid of him at best. Or Salem could just erase his memory, so who cares? No non-abusive parents in real life wouldn't side with their daughter in this situation when they have a literal drill sergeant for a principal. Hilda unironically grounds her for 2 weeks, not letting her have TV, DVDs, or a computer except for homework. And if Sabrina had a brain, she'd use magic so that she'd get around their punishment. All Salem the sociopath says is that he'll have to pick up his own dry cleaning. And Hilda's a complete sociopath by saying that's not the end of the world, and she runs away crying, and cathartically says in this tearjerker of a panel, "You're just as mean as Corporal Bandsaw." Good God, I want these ants dead. How can anyone possibly sympathize with them at this point? I literally want Sabrina to run away from home and insist on living with anybody else but these psychotic assholes. Isn't there anyone else in her family that could take her? It's completely forced that they would side with the drill sergeant. If they can erase memories whenever they want, they shouldn't care about her using magic at school and should know that she's going through a hard enough time as it is. If Sabrina wasn't an idiot, she'd make a potion that'd make the corporal a nice guy and use magic to force him to drink it. That was obvious immediately. Instead, she tries to solve things the mortal way because this comic forgets that she's supposed to be a witch sometimes. Sabrina wonders out of complete nowhere if the corporal has something to hide. It is really hard to tell who's talking. The text bubbles are shaped funny and are coming out of the computer. And Sabrina and Chloe are on the same panel. I guess since Sabrina doesn't have an older brother because that'd be interesting, it's Chloe who's saying that her older brother is a whiz on the web who could do some digging. You'd think that they would be far from the only people planning on this. You'd think word would have gotten out to the internet and the media would know how he was running the school from day one. The students would all be talking about it on social media. I guess this guy was always hated. And if you're going to have him be a drill sergeant with the excuse that it's a cartoon, then there's no excuse for not having there be a lot more magic and the ants being okay with magic because it's a cartoon. Sabrina complains about being forced to paint the gym walls and cover up her school mascot. Chloe dumbly takes the risk of showing Sabrina the proof that the corporal has something to hide, instead of just using it. Chloe gets startled by a guy who doesn't look related to her, saying that maybe Chloe's brother will join his agency someday. Sabrina's naturally paranoid at this point because she's a chew toy of the whole comic and says, "Let's see some ID from your agency." So he incorrectly thinks that she's fast on her feet and says that he thinks he can trust her and Chloe to help bring down the corporal. The girls high-five, saying cool, as if this whole thing is supposed to make up for the horseshit that was the story. Sometimes you can go too far in making a character unlikable, especially when you ruin other characters in the process. The ants have already crossed the moral event horizon 3 times by this point. Sabrina and Chloe satisfyingly taunt the corporal by walking around in front of him without their uniforms with normal clothes on. Chloe says, "Nice of you to notice, Major." He complains that Sabrina's wearing headphones, and Chloe says, "Why, I believe she is. I guess she's wearing a wire too." Couldn't any of the students have had this guy's dickery exposed by not only complaining on social media, but also having their cell phones with cameras on and hidden in their clothes? Though I wouldn't have put it past them to have demanded the cell phones to all be put in one place at the start of every day. Corporal complains that he's gonna bust them. Doesn't that mean he's threatening to hit children, which would be especially illegal for him? He's so oversensitive and full of himself that he finds a reason to be offended at being called dude. I can't help but wonder if this writer does not like the military. But who can blame him for imagining any guy in a military position of power as acting like this? Aren't they all contractually obligated to be like this? It still doesn't justify writing the story, though. Sabrina tells him that he's not who he says he is, calling him Poindexter J. Whifflepop. I hope I'm not supposed to believe that's his actual name, but Chloe calls him Poser. Who would actually name their kid Poindexter unless they hate their kid? Actually, that would explain why he's turned out so horrible, but wouldn't make it forgivable. He reveals that of course it is his name because fuck logic. His reaction only confirms that Sabrina's right because he says, "Who told?" and he screws up saying his fake name. Sabrina predictably reveals that her headphones are a recording device. Chloe says that he's been impersonating a US officer, and he's a computer hacker wannabe who created Corporal Bandsaw. Him being an impersonator doesn't change the fact that he acts like a stereotypical military sergeant and ruins the whole story. And if he was a sergeant, it would have actually made a lot more sense that he was acting like this. Because it would be from force of habit from being in that job for so long. Students playing hooky would have been absolutely through the roof. It's not like this is a Deus Ex Machina because it is plausible, but it came out of nowhere. You know it's a consistently terrible comic when I immediately predicted that the conclusion wouldn't end with illogical consequences, and I was proven right. That evening, there's a hastily called meeting of the school board, and the chairman apologizes and assures the audience that this kind of fraud will never take place again. It shouldn't just be fraud that got him fired, though. Why couldn't we have seen Sabrina use magic on him a lot and scare the heck out of him? Someone says in the audience, it better not or there'll be a new school board. The fact that they hired someone acting and dressing like a corporal should have already been grounds for there to be a new school board. Thankfully, Sabrina and Chloe get publicly acknowledged as identifying the imposter, but I also want Sabrina's 2-week grounding undone. It's completely outlandish that the new principal is a beatnik hippie. Why did the comic have the gall to do this kind of thing again? And since when would someone like him get hired as the principal? Wouldn't he get turned down in the job interview? Job interviews have people turned down because of petty reasons, like they didn't do the handshake perfectly. Well, that was a complete dumpster fire trash fest. How do you get this wrong? She could warp him into the other realm and end the plot in 2 seconds. Then we could immediately skip to the beatnik getting hired, and that'd make a much less frustrating story. Most of the story was frustrating, so there wasn't a point in keeping him around. This comic seemed to be getting better, but now my hopes have been destroyed for the moment. Why weren't Hilda, Zelda, and the Corporal given a ton of slapstick and humiliation? In the next story, Salem asks Sabrina what's with the new poster. Sabrina says that she saw an awesome movie today about a teenager with superpowers. Of course she would love to live vicariously through that teenager despite having magic herself, because her magic doesn't matter if she can't get away with anything. It's a wonder she can breathe she's being smothered so much. Salem says that her powers will be pretty super when she learns to use them. All of the most useful spells, there's no excuse for not learning to use them well immediately. She says that the centipede uses its powers to fight crime and have adventures. The obvious retort is that fighting crime has no reason to work because there will always be criminals, though stopping muggers and attempted murders in the act is worth it. But violent crime gets really overreported when it's less than 10% of actual cases on trial. Realistically, she'd be running around the city for a long time trying to find anything to do. Logically, she'd never be in danger. She complains that she's gotta pretend to be immortal, and wishes that she would dream about being a superhero. And Salem makes sure she will dream about it. It's immensely disappointing that it has to be a dream. I'd actually rather see a parallel universe of Sabrina at that point. At least that'd be real in universe instead of a complete waste of time that'll probably make me wish the comic was like this and make it look bad as a result. It's nice of Salem to use magic to watch her dream. Sabrina dreams that she's the winner of the school science fair for exciting study of how a ladybug eats a leaf. And Jem says, wait, what about my project? The comic should really be about this. Jem says that she discovered a new source of energy using a keratin hair scrunchie. Why would she say that if she hadn't? Sure, she doesn't deserve to ever win anything. She doesn't need the ego boost. But still, I was proud of her for being a scientific genius. At least she'd benefit people that way. Too bad the story can't matter because they could go with that. But she's already overpowered and able to get away with too much as it is with just rich powers. But at least science powers can lead to enjoyable and interesting plots, while a character being able to do anything because they're rich usually just gets you infuriated and jealous. She plugs in and her hair gets ruined and she's laughed at, and I wish I understood why she blamed Sabrina for it. Sabrina holds a ladybug in concern after the explosion and it bites her while it's glowing. It wouldn't be glowing, it'd be electrocuted to death. Instead, I bet this will be the excuse for getting superpowers, and I bet Jem will have superpowers too because she was near the same experiment. Salem's not a good writer, but he's doing this to imitate superhero comics, so he probably thinks he has to, and is too lazy to come up with anything else. Also, why the fuck didn't we see the explosion instead of just seeing an immature, childish kablam panel? An explosion being near anyone would kill them. It also deafened anyone who wasn't killed from the shrapnel and fire. I wish I knew why the explosion happened from her plugging something in. I guess she can't be a witch because she wouldn't have been raised to not use powers. Hence why she'd jump really high in front of everyone no problem to catch a flying science project, after she ate a plant like Ladybug would. She wants to go home and make a superhero costume. If she doesn't have the ability to conjure it up, a well-written story with care and thought put into it would ever complain that it's harder than it looks to get a costume. We don't even get to see her have a sewing machine, let alone learn how to use it. Realistically, she wouldn't bother with something as inherently lame and cumbersome as a superhero costume. Tradition or not, she'd feel hot in it. She'd be estranged by it. If you're gonna write a concept that a million people have done already, there's no excuse for you not being the one to write it brilliantly, not just blindly doing what everyone else is doing. There's a reason I love the Rick and Morty Vindicator stories. The stories know they're silly. Wouldn't he know everything that's gonna happen in the dream seconds ahead of when it happens because he made her have it? He'd be the one writing the story. I guess his magic was writing the story, because it was smart enough to do that. I guess it makes sense that her mind went to Ladybug, because she's a lady. Sure, she just saw a centipede superhero, but that's not a ladybug. I wonder if the writing will at least be realistic enough to have her get stuck in a door frame or something because of her big costume. Not to mention she would be humiliated and laughed at. But I'm not sure I want to see her be even more of a chew toy than she already is. She sees Jem shooting from a hairdryer to make everyone else in the world have a bad hair day like her. It's a pretty creative goal for a villain. And Jem's standing on a flying platform too. If she's so smart now, why can't she make her hair not suck anymore? Can't she, worst case scenario, shave her hair and get a wig? She looks over at Sabrina and whoa, she actually looks scary from the front there. That's actually a pretty badass villain. She says that ladybugs don't do anything but fly around and eat bugs and plants. Well, they can bite. Is Sabrina gonna bite her? No, that implied that the comic had guts and was going with logic. Sabrina tells Jem that she should have learned more about ladybugs. I guess she googled them to know this. If Jem was really made smart, she'd be shooting Sabrina here instead of letting her say her telegraphed speech. Jem would have shot her before she'd released a powerful odor against her. She removes her sock and puts an end to her evil plans. Why does she have to remove her sock to do that when she's a ladybug? And it figures that in her idealized dream, her ants haven't shown up. Salem says that this dream is really stinky. He should say it's because Sabrina's gotten a superhero costume for no reason and isn't complaining that it's too hot or large or stupid looking. I prefer the Sonic characters because I'd rather see animal people as unique and charming character designs than we have to put these guys in costumes to make them iconic. Because they're just boring, dumb humans otherwise. It is satisfying to see Jem get what she deserves. Salem makes a change to Sabrina's dream, because there's only so long he can keep being good. So he presumably ruins her dream by summoning Catman in it, who can fly for no reason. That's the end of the story? What about Sabrina hitting muggers? What about her educating us on ladybugs more? This feels like the beginning of a story. This was just one fight. And Jem was only defeated in one so-called attack. It's building up to something kind of exciting. And then it just peters out. This should have been the whole issue. I'd love to see Sabrina use her magic against Jem a lot more. In the final story, Hilda shows Sabrina an amazing collection of costume jewelry. Why am I supposed to accept that she's in the story and Sabrina's smiling at her after the first story? That could be the problem with episodic stories. They use the fact that the series is episodic as a lame excuse to never have the main characters apologize to make up for being assholes and get proper comeuppance. Hilda says she started wearing fake jewelry a few centuries ago because real jewels attracted pirates. But wouldn't pirates go after her anyways? How would they know it's fake jewelry? Sabrina says that she'd love to go to the football game today, covered in jewels from head to toe. She's really focusing on appearance and that's it. Obviously she'd be like, please mug me this way. And she was just told what the dangers of jewels were. But she's a witch, so she could easily protect herself. Except she's a moron in this comic, so she wouldn't. She'd just stand there and get mugged and whine and go to her aunts for help. Hilda smartly suggests her just picking out a simple ring to wear. If this was the 70s Hilda, she'd just magically zap a bunch of jewelry on her. And Sabrina could have done that for herself. Sabrina thanks her, and I immediately wonder if this is a hope spot and the ring will turn out to have a magical spell on it that Hilda inconveniently forgot about. Because things are going well for her. We can't have that. Not at the beginning of a story anyways. It'd actually be a better twist if the ring was completely pointless. The writer should be aware of how the comic is so predictable and proudly subvert our expectations. Sabrina says that she just knows she's going to be in a good mood all day. That immediately gave away to me that she'll be in a bad mood all day. At least she's not grumpy right afterwards. Chloe asks Sabrina if she feels sick, because her skin is kind of a weird pinkish color. I haven't noticed the difference, so the artist failed. How do you screw that up? I love that Chloe's concerned about her, that's pretty sweet. Sabrina says that the only thing she feels is happy because she's wearing a beautiful ring. Sabrina gets mad because Harvey's with a pretty girl that they never saw before. Why in the world would a ring have a magical spell on it that turns her green for being envious? Or ever changes skin color? That's not consumer friendly. I hope it's explained that some spiteful witch put a curse on this ring. If Sabrina had an actual functioning brain, she'd just warp home immediately. Not to mention take the ring off right away instead of stating the obvious for 2 panels. Why would Chloe say that she's been eating too many vegetables again? It's so obvious the ring is causing this, because the ring is what's new. They take another panel up stating the obvious, as if the writer thinks the audience are a bunch of idiots who can't figure it out on their own. I guess these panels are mandatory though, because they would say this. But they'd be saying it while Sabrina's trying to do something to deal with the problem. Predictably, the ring stuck. Yeah, that's consumer friendly. Chloe says it's cool that she's purple with rage. You'd think she'd be red. But while it seems insensitive of her since Sabrina's upset and says she's not helping, it's actually kind of sweet showing off how she likes Sabrina for who she is. She thinks her being a witch is cool, even if her being wary and whining almost any time she uses her powers has started to give off the opposite impression. I'm glad she apologizes to Sabrina for saying it was cool when clearly it wasn't. At this point I'm starting to wonder if it's even possible to magic the ring off, because the story just started. And if the ring's already cursed, it wouldn't be as simple as warping the ring away. Sabrina gets paranoid that if she uses the wrong spell, the ring could be stuck on her finger forever. How could she screw up that bad? She'd have to do it on purpose. How could it be hard to imagine the ring on the ground? But she has a right to be paranoid, because her entire comic has been nothing but times where things went horribly wrong for her out of nowhere for no reason. Is this supposed to be a punishment that she deserves for being vain enough to wear jewelry? Even that can't be enjoyed by her. Chloe cries all of a sudden out of sympathy for Sabrina. To be fair, Sabrina was shedding tears, but she could be much more pitiful and begging you to shed tears, like when she was grounded. This happens too easily. It's like she's under a spell, but it was sweet of her. She runs with Sabrina and says they should get her home to her aunt's. Why isn't she telling her to warp home? Some football players see Sabrina, but her panicking that they'll see her as a freak immediately gives away that they'll think she painted herself with face paint. It turns out, all of a sudden, that now her face is half red and yellow, because she was scared and embarrassed at the same time. That's interesting. It was sweet that one of them called her beautiful. Why the hell didn't the story show her aunt's getting the ring off? Wasn't that kind of important? We don't even get to learn why the ring was like that. And it turns out the girl that was with Harvey was not his new girlfriend, but his cousin, which was done in the first issue of the 70s comic already. So I guess it's a cliche. And now it just compounds on the recurring problem with the comic where it's too gutless, and has skewed priorities because it still goes dark anyways. Her being related to him was foreshadowed by her having the same hair color as him though. The comic could have developed on this girl's character. The first story, by Mike Gallagher, felt like complete horseshit because the new principal of Sabrina's school was an unbearable monster for way too much of the story. There was a lot that was done with the idea of a drill sergeant principal. I'm sure it's creative, but it didn't feel like it because it just used a tired cliche and put it in a new setting where logic gets thrown out the window by having it around. He would have been fired in a single day. There's so many reasons he would have gotten fired. Instead it turns out that he's lying about being a corporal even though he acts just like one. And he gets found out by school children, and that's why he's fired? There was one satisfying page where Sabrina and Chloe flaunt his rules to get him too riled up to keep his composure before getting him to reveal his guilt. But he obviously should have been punished for what he was actually guilty of. Not even Sabrina's aunt saved this story. Their scene could have been removed from the story and nothing would have been lost. You know the story is mean-spirited dark when Jem doesn't have to suffer at all and somehow gets special treatment by a drill sergeant. Too many little things were stupid about the story. The second story, by Angelo, It's about Sabrina becoming a superhero in her dream because bullshit and spraying Gem with a bad odor, educating us about how ladybugs are. And because I hate Gem and how powerless Sabrina is in this comic about witches, I wish the whole comic would be this way. It seemed like the story was building up to more. Not just her hitting Gem with a spray once, not even getting to punch her. This should have been the main story. The writing didn't even try to be better than lame superhero comics, because she actually made a superhero comic successfully with no attention put to how she did it, and wore it because of tradition. She didn't hate being in it, and the origin of her powers was bullshit. Why can't they just be born with their powers all the time? And it's lame that there's no hitting because that scene is too dark. But at least it empowered Sabrina for once. At least it was creative because she used a unique attack against Gem. It may have been pointless because it was a dream, but I'm glad I resisted the temptation to skip it because it was pretty good and cathartic after that crappy story. I like that Salem made her have the dream to be nice, because I didn't have to be written to make the dream happen. And the final story is about Sabrina using Hilda's magic ring, and because of bullshit Diabolos Ex Machina, it makes her skin change colors with her mood. And she can't take it off. And somehow the story cuts past her and saving the day. We should have been told why the ring was made in such a cursed, anti-consumer way. And why didn't Sabrina instantly warp home? A big deal was made about her learning how to teleport. Chloe was made a fool out of, partly by not suggesting that. And it was interesting that Sabrina was mistaken for wearing face paint because she turned 2 colors at once and was complimented for it. So that wasn't as mean as it could have been. But really, how could Hilda have forgotten that the ring did that? She can't even get away with wearing a ring. Nothing goes right for her, and she doesn't get to enjoy her magic to make up for it this time.